Ek gesels vandag met Andrew Ardington en ons gesels oor die konsep van herlewingslandbou. Andrew, welcome to Grootplaas.
Hi, thank you very much for having me. It's a privilege to be here.
It's lovely talking to you. First of all, I would love for you to explain to me what exactly is this concept and why does it make you so excited?
So regenerative agriculture is really about moving towards farming with nature rather than against nature. And we have so many problems on our planet today in terms of the environment. We have climate change, biodiversity collapse, and so many of these problems. And many of them come back to soil and land. And we need to work on repairing that soil and land. When you look at a parcel of land, it comes with what we call ecosystem services.
Yeah.
And these are certain services that the soil gives you that you're able to use to then make money from that land. And those services are things like water retention, cleaning water, cleaning air, sequestrating carbon, creating a stable climate, providing nutrients for food, creating a stable environment on the farm. And all of that comes together to enable you to make food. And what we have done over the last couple of 100 years in agriculture is we have eroded those ecosystem services and then had to replace them with external inputs. And this has been a problem for the on-farm environment and for the bigger environment, but it's also a problem for the bottom line of the farmer. The farmer is having to spend more and more money bringing in external inputs onto the farm in order to make up for the decreasing quality of the soil.
Yeah.
And that's not a great equation when, on the one hand, your one asset is deteriorating, the soil is gradually losing its ability to give you services, and on the other hand, the costs of the input prices are going up. It doesn't look pretty in the future. And so we need to come up with a way of farming which enables us to build up those ecosystem services in the soil and then get all of that free input from the environment onto our farms so that our farms are economically sustainable and also function in a way that works with the environment.
So on a very practical level, how does this work? If a farmer is interested in this concept?
So at a very practical level, regenerative agriculture has a very broad definition, or a number of broad definitions. It's not actually singly defined. But if we bring it down to the core, which is the soil, there are 5 principles that one would follow as a farmer. And it's not a recipe. These are principles that you implement. And those 5 principles all have one thing in common. They're about maximizing the health of the biology in the soil. And that's really what we want to do. All of life on Earth is facilitated by the soil biology, but our lifelong, our generations-long agricultural practices actually destroy this life. And we need to work out how to produce food without destroying that biology in the soil. And so those 5 practices, the first one is minimum disturbance. And that means minimum disturbance with both implements, plows, and with chemicals, because both of those things kill soil biology.
Yeah, it plays a role.
And so that's just killing it outright. And we want to try and minimize that. Otherwise, all that happens is every time we plant a crop, we destroy biology, and it spends the next year building itself up again, just in time for us to crash it down again.
Yeah.
And so that's the first principle. The second principle is we want to keep the ground covered. If you think about it as their house, the house of the soil biology, we keep taking the roof off the house and removing all the plants, burning stuff off the fields, getting all the stubble off the fields, and leaving for most of the year, for generally speaking, about 8 months of the year, that soil just exposed to the sun and the wind and the rain. just as we wouldn't like to have no house for no roof for 8 months of the year, the soil biology doesn't like having no roof for 8 months of the year.
Yeah.
Yeah. Then the next thing is the only real way to get food to that soil biology is to have plants that are photosynthesizing. So plants that are photosynthesizing put sugars into the soil as part of their relationship with that soil biology to get their water and their nutrients back from the soil. Yeah. So that can only happen if there is a growing plant in the soil. Now, if you think about most of our agricultural fields, whether they are mealie fields in the Free State or wheat fields in the Western Cape, for about 8 months of the year, they have nothing growing in them. We follow this practice of bare ground. And so that is a really big problem. Then the next thing is diversity. So every plant gives off slightly different sugars and communicates with different parts of the soil biology. Yeah. So when we have a very limited number of species of plants in a field, then that poor soil biology is basically getting cornflakes for breakfast, cornflakes for lunch, cornflakes for supper, 7 days a week and 12 months a year. And so what we want to do is we want to have crop rotations, and farmers have started to introduce this, where you grow maize and soybeans and sunflowers in the same field. And then the next thing is to introduce a cover crop, which is a crop that it can have more than 10 species of plants in it, to bring amazing diversity, to feed that soil and to support a more diverse biology within the soil. And that biology helps to feed your plant and protect your plant. So that's the next thing. And then the final one is that we want to reincorporate animals back into row cropping. Yeah. So if you go back to before we invented fertilizer, all farms had animals on them. And those animals were part of a system, an ecosystem of creating compost, breaking down vegetative matter and returning it to the soil and accelerating that process to keep that soil biology working. Then when we invented fertilizer, we removed the animals and put them in feedlots. And we replaced their fertility function with fertilizer. And the end result is that a large number of farms in, for instance, the maize belt don't have cattle on them anymore at all. And if they do have cattle, they're just on some hills where there's veld, where farmers can't farm because they're rocks or whatever, so they can't be farming there. So the cattle are no longer going into the field, and that whole biology is not being stimulated and cycled. And so all of those things, if you think about them, everything I described was building up the soil biology. And previously what we've done is we've just taken it down, and removed its ability to do things for us, to give us ecosystem services. And then we've had to replace those with synthetic inputs, which you now have to mortgage your house in order to buy those things.
Yes, exactly.
And we've done studies, lots of studies, and the economics of continuing with the business as usual, with continuing with these increasing inputs and the decreasing soil condition is not good. It is not sustainable, and we can't carry on farming like that for the next 25 years. It's just not going to happen. And so the great thing about regenerative agriculture is it enables us to transition into a system whereby we can heal the soil and then reduce our inputs as a result of farming once again with healthy soil.
This is extremely educational, and it's so nice to hear you talking about it. I'm wondering, how big is the in-buy from farmers? I mean, if we look at South Africa, how many farmers are adopting this style of farming?
So it's very small.
I can imagine. Yeah.
It's new, but all over the country there are amazing pioneer farmers who have been adopting these processes. And so I suppose it started back in the late 70s with the advent of no-till farming and no-till equipment being available, whereby you could plant your seeds without having to plow the soil. Yeah. And that was step one of what became known as conservation agriculture. And regenerative agriculture, the 5 principles, are an extension of the 3 principles of conservation agriculture. And so slowly it's been happening, and there are a lot of farmers in South Africa who practice conservation agriculture. It's called conservation agriculture because it conserves soil. It stops the soil being eroded away. The problem, though, when you stop at conservation agriculture, you stop losing soil, but you don't build up soil health. And so you don't regenerate. You stay where you are. And we can't afford to stay where we are. We've got to get better. We've got to regenerate so that we can get those ecosystem services from the soil and make farming sustainable into the future at an economic level so that we can have food security.
And is it more cost effective, obviously?
Yeah, ultimately, there is a significant drop in the costs of inputs. And there is a transition period where probably you'll have to put other inputs in, biological stimulants, for instance, to help you do that. And then you can buy those in, or in many cases, you can make those yourself if you've done the research and studied and are a pioneer enough that you're going to go and do that. But there really exists the ability to reduce input costs significantly. And that's where the future comes. If you look at a graph of industrial agriculture, whether you're looking in the United States or in Australia or South Africa, there is a big gap between the income from farming and what the farmers get. And that gap has been growing and growing and growing as we've had more external inputs. We started with just fertilizer, then we had fertilizer and chemicals, then we had to put more fertilizer, then we had to put more different kinds of chemicals. And as that's grown and grown and grown, the farmer gets less and less of the final sale price. And we need to reduce those external inputs onto the farm so that the farmer gets more of the final sale price.
And just one last question, does this apply to all types of farming?
It does apply to all types of farming. So any farming that involves soil. Hydroponics cannot be regenerative. So any type of farming that utilizes soil, you can find a way to implement those principles and regenerate that soil.
I really appreciate your knowledge and thank you for talking to me. And I hope that, I hope it was valuable for a lot of farmers. Be better, that's what I always say. Thank you, Andrew, I really appreciate it.
Thank you very much for having us on the show.
Newater is 'n slim waterbehandelingsoplossingmaatskappy wat wêreldwyd hoëgehalte oplossings bied. Newater se watersuiweringsaanlegte is funksioneel met min onderhoud en waarborg volhoubare watervoorraad teen die hoeveelheid en kwaliteit wat benodig word. Die innoverende tegnologie is deur Newater ontwerpers en ingenieurs ontwikkel vir optimale herwinning. Die vermindering van kapitaalkostes vir die eindverbruiker is 'n sleuteldoelwit van die New Thinking filosofie. Vir meer inligting besoek newater.com vandag nog. Ek groet jou, dankie dat jy ingeskakel het en mag jy 'n wonderlike dag verder hê. Stuur gerus vir my 'n e-pos by info@grootplaas.co.za. Totsiens.